is financially sustainable in the long term. And that's what the changes will assist, and that will reassure a very large number of people for whom PIP is vitally important.
Catherine Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Epilepsy is a lifelong disability which has huge consequences on the lives of those who have epilepsy. No more so than the mothers who had epilepsy and took sodium valproate when pregnant and whose babies were harmed. Will the Minister take some time to meet with me and my constituent, Janet Williams, whose sons have been affected, to discuss how we can ensure that the quality of their lives is best supported by this government?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend raises a very important subject. As she knows, the Department of Health and Social Care has set up the Valproate Pregnancy Prevention Programme, or it's been set up by the MHRA, and I or my honourable friend the Minister at the HSC will be very glad to meet her to discuss those points.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We all know that life is more expensive if you're disabled. We know that investing in mental health and social care would give disabled people the support that they deserve. If the government was serious, we believe as Liberal Democrats, about cutting welfare spending, it would get serious about fixing health and social care and the broken department of working pensions. And we know that by fixing that, we'd reduce the benefits bill in the long term. But yesterday's changes, slashing support offered to vulnerable people, will leave many people again facing difficult choices. So can the Minister assure disabled people, including the 80,000 in Scotland who are still receiving PIP, that their needs will be listened to, taken into account, and that they will somehow continue to get the support that they need?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the Honourable Lady will welcome the additional £26 billion being invested in the National Health Service in the coming financial year for exactly the reasons that she has set out. And the most severely impaired will be protected in the changes that we've made to, we've announced yesterday, to personal independence payment. Yes, we will be consulting. There will be a full 12-week consultation period on the Green Paper proposals, and we'll be listening very carefully to what everybody says in response.
John Grady.
Question number 2, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 2, 6 and 14 together. This government is clear that someone's race or ethnicity should never be a barrier to success. As set out in the King's Speech last July, we are committed to introducing mandatory ethnicity and disability pay gap reporting for large employers. These measures will be part of the draft Equality, Race and Disability Bill. Yesterday, we published a consultation on these proposals and also announced that we have established a new race equality engagement group to partner with ethnic minority communities, stakeholders and delivery partners to help shape the government's work on race equality. And I'm delighted that Baroness Lawrence of Clarendon has agreed to chair this group.
John Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Glasgow's Muslim community is characterised by its kindness and public service. Last weekend, I visited my friends at the Hillview Islamic Centre in Shettleston and met with the convener of the Muslim Council for Scotland, Dr. Mohammed Adris. I heard terrible incidents of anti-Muslim hatred and crimes in Glasgow and the west of Scotland. Does my honourable friend agree with me that our Muslim brothers and sisters should not have to live with this hatred? And would my honourable friend set out the steps that the government is taking to combat this hatred?
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I completely agree with him. And indeed, I also attended a wonderful interfaith iftar in Hounslow on Friday. Islamophobia is completely abhorrent and has no place in our society, and no one should ever be the victim of hatred because of their religion or their belief. The government has established a new working group to provide the government with a definition of anti-Muslim hatred and Islamophobia, advising government and other bodies on how best to understand, quantify and define prejudice, discrimination and hate crime targeted against Muslims.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Minister for her commitment to mandatory ethnic pay gap reporting However, I was very disappointed to see that the FCA and the PRA are rolling back on their proposals to boost diversity in financial services. I feel this decision is risking pushing away the very best talent from the sector. With only 4% of financial services firms currently disclosing their ethnicity pay gap reporting, this announcement would only dampen the pace of change that's needed to tackle inequality. So could I ask the Minister, does she agree with me that initiatives that are aimed to reduce the ethnicity pay gap are not just anti-growth, they are pro-talent and pro-growth as well?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fair and equal treatment at work is a right and not a privilege. Companies like Deloitte, who I visited recently, are also reporting voluntarily on their ethnicity pay gaps. And I've also attended roundtables chaired by organisations like Change the Race Ratio and Share Action, who are promoting the benefits of ethnicity pay gap reporting. And indeed, the progress last week that we saw on the Parker Review is also seeing increasing numbers of ethnic minority board members on our FTSE companies. I agree with my honourable friend that pay gap reporting can help employers to identify and remove barriers to progression within their workforces and unleash talent from all of our communities, thereby supporting economic growth. And I thank her for her work on this also.
Hamid Yassin.
Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to see the government's announcement of the newly established Race Equality Engagement Group, chaired by Baroness Doreen Lawrence, a tireless campaign against discrimination for many, many decades. Could the Minister please clarify what steps the government is taking to recognise caste-based discrimination in law and whether this issue will be the focus of the group's work?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and indeed he references the Race Equality Engagement Group that we announced yesterday, and indeed this group will strengthen the government's links with ethnic minority communities, enabling effective two-way dialogue on the government's work to tackle race equalities, engaging on all issues. And we are considering our position on caste discrimination under the Equality Act 2010. We will update the House in due course.
Gregory Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a former employee of the NHS, I was shocked to find that the Community Security Trust had found that the number of complaints of anti-Semitism in the NHS had tripled in the 17 months before and after the 7th of October 2023. Can I ask the Minister, what steps is the government taking to crack down on anti-Semitism within the NHS?
Good question. Minister.
He will also agree that anti-Semitism has no place in our society and in our workplace. This is an extremely important issue, and he will know that the Home Secretary and the whole of the government takes this very seriously.
Kirsty Black.
A mosque in my constituency was vandalised while worshippers were inside. I'm really pleased that the local community came together and helped in the clean-up. We're aware that the University of Glasgow has published a report that says 1 in 3 Muslim students are victims of Islamophobic abuse. Would the government let us know and agree that the government and the House have got a responsibility to ensure that racist stereotypes are not putting our Muslim community at risk from rising hate crimes and from far-right extremism?
Minister.
She is absolutely right, and it is important that we tackle religious and racial hatred in all its forms.
We're a Hospice.
As well as overt discrimination, there are many hidden ethnic disparities, particularly in healthcare. Mortality rates in maternity services are 4 times higher for black women and twice as high for Asian women. What discussions is his department having, her department having, and with the Department of Health to address these huge inequalities in maternity care? Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. She is absolutely right. There are stark inequalities within maternal health and also in mental health and a range of other issues, including infant mortality. She is absolutely right that this must be tackled, and there is ongoing work that we're doing across government and with the Department for Health on these issues.
So, Secretary of State Nimsdale.
Yeah. Does the Minister think it is acceptable for anyone in this country to say, pray for victory of Hamas over Israel, or indeed celebrate the 7th of October attacks as David over Goliath situation? If not, Mr. Speaker, why did the Prime Minister invite Adam Kelwick who has said such despicable things to Number 10 just last week. Will she apologise, therefore, on behalf of the Prime Minister to the Jewish community, who need to know this government will actually stand against them when it comes to violence, hatred and division, and in fact all communities when it comes to race, religion, and all communities need to be supported?
Minister.
I thank the Shadow Minister for her question, and indeed she knows that Hamas is a prescribed organisation, and we will not tolerate at any point and in any way anti-Semitism.
Durham Puffy.
Question number 3, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with your permission, I shall group this question with questions 10 and 13. We will deliver a cross-government VORG strategy and are already taking significant steps to make sure VORG is treated as a national emergency that it is. This includes embedding the first domestic abuse specialists in 999 control rooms, starting in 5 police forces under Raneem's law, and extending the further rollout of domestic abuse protection orders in Cleveland and North Wales.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for her answer. A constituent of mine in Southampton, Itchen, suffered horrendous domestic and sexual abuse while she was a serving police officer, but inexplicably she was not allowed by the rules to take her complaint to the IOPC, therefore becoming a victim of the very system that was meant to offer her protection. Does the Minister agree that a woman's right to get justice should not depend on the job that she happens to be doing? And will the Minister meet with me and my constituent to discuss the changes needed so we can better protect dedicated public servants like her?
Minister.
I absolutely agree, and I'm more than happy to meet with him and his constituent. Allegations of any crime involving serving police officers should be investigated robustly and independently by the police. And outside of criminal investigations, disciplinary investigations, including those involving serious assault and sexual violence, are referred to the IOPC under mandatory referral criteria, but there is more to do.
Kemi Badenoch.
Speaker, in my constituency of Stevenage, we have an excellent charity called SADA, Survivors Against Domestic Abuse. Charities like SADA rely on multi-agency working to deliver essential services to those affected by domestic abuse. Will the Minister outline how this government is continuing to support organisations and working closely together to continue to provide effective services to those who have suffered domestic abuse?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend and would like to thank SADA for the amazing work that they do. In December 2024, we prioritised confirming funding for those delivering frontline services, and we will be working in the next few weeks to agree decisions on our wider budget in support of the government's ambition to halve VORG in a decade, which includes delivering on our manifesto commitments.
Sarah Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On International Women's Day, our community in Tamworth came together not only to celebrate the achievements of women, but also to reflect on the important issue of women's and girls' safety. Local woman Tamana and Mackenzie took the initiative to organise a walk and talk event, bringing together key organisations including the Up Creative CIC and Tamworth Street Angels. They've never organised an event before and managed to pull together 50 women in just 2 weeks. Will the Minister join me in congratulating Tamana and Mackenzie on this fantastic event and their dedication to raising awareness about such an important issue?
Minister.
Absolutely, gladly. Tamana and Mackenzie deserve all of our praise, and what I would say is that it's infectious, and the first time you do it often leads to the second, and the rising of the women is the rising of us all.
Smith.
Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure we all agree that securing women's well-being is key to tackling violence against women and girls. So can the Minister assure women across my South West Devon constituency and across the country that, having promised to prioritise women's health, that the Labour government is committed to continuing the previous Conservative government's work to ensure that there is a women's health hub in every integrated care board to ensure holistic support for women?
Minister.
My Minister to my left tells me that they are in 9 out of 10 10 already, and what I can assure her is that I am working very closely with the Department of Health on the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, because actually there are real gaps in how domestic abuse, sexual violence and other related abuses are dealt with by our health services, and it will form an absolute fundamental part to both protection and prevention.
Lock up.
And can I thank the Minister for her answers, and can I thank her for her ongoing engagement on this issue with the people in Northern Ireland. The name Natalie McNally will mean much to the Minister. On the 18th of December, Natalie McNally, along with her unborn baby, were brutally murdered in my constituency in Upper Bann. Can she update the House on ongoing discussions around a UK-wide strategy for tackling violence against women that will improve conviction rates, get tougher on sentencing and provide more support for the victims? And we do this in the name of Natalie and the many that have lost their lives.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her continued support of Natalie's family, and while I was over in Northern Ireland, that was very, very clear for me to see that support had been in place. What I will say to her is that the fundamental part of halving violence against women and girls has to be looking at the exact issue she is talking about, and that is the femicide of women, and how we can all work together in a multi-agency way to ensure that names like Natalie McNally are not ones I have to read out.
So Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, will the Minister discuss with the Home Secretary how best those still surviving who aided and abetted Mohammed Fayed in the rape and sexual assault of young women and girls be brought to account, even belatedly?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and would like to say that this is something that myself and the Home Secretary have very much discussed. And while there are ongoing police investigations, it would be inappropriate for me to make any further comment. However, having met with some of those affected, I want to see exactly what he wants to see.
Chair of the Committee, Sarah Owen.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister and many colleagues in this place will be aware of the groundbreaking new Netflix programme called Adolescence. It's chilling, but is rightfully forcing a national conversation about the dangerous content seen by young men and boys with fatal consequences. Given the important role schools play in preventing violence against women and girls, will the Minister provide an update on what is being done with the Department of Education to counter misogyny and extreme violence to enable a safe future for young boys and girls?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and she is absolutely right that including men and boys in the conversation about how we prevent future violence against women and girls is going to be absolutely fundamental, and a huge portion of the new Violence Against Women and Girls strategy is focused exactly on that, on prevention and what we can do in our schools, our workplaces and elsewhere to reach men and boys to change the future.
Ellen Morgan.
Constituency who are victims of domestic violence, and their partners continue to exert control over them through the family court process and the presumption that they will be able to access their children. Will the Minister meet with me or inform me what she's doing with the Department of Justice to help those women escape that control?
I work hand in glove with my counterparts in the Ministry of Justice on the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, and I have long-standing concerns, as she has, around the presumption of contact and the issue of the family court. It will form part of reforms and is currently being looked into. I will gladly meet with her.
Secretary State Mims Davies.
In January, the Labour government committed they would be assisting 5 local inquiries, including one in Oldham, into grooming gangs and rape gangs. Mr. Speaker, now 2 months on,
Carry on, Secretary of State.
You should know better than that.
in January, the Labour government committed they would be assisting 5 local inquiries, including one in Oldham, into grooming and rape gangs. Mr. Speaker, now 2 months on, we've had no update from the government about the other locations. So in which towns can women and girls now sleep safely in their beds? And when and where are the other 4 inquiries going to take place? And what does the government plan to do about the other 45 towns and cities across the country where these gangs have reportedly operated?
Minister.
Well, what the government plans to do across the country is more than was done before. And what I would say is that the House should expect an update very soon on exactly all of the plans, as the Home Secretary, when she laid out her plans, that it would come before Easter. And I beg of the Honourable Lady the patience she offered her own government when they offered none of this.
We come to Dr. Charlotte Nettles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to research, 52% of topical one. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government celebrated International Women's Day and Women's History Month by accelerating action to change women's lives. This means greater opportunities in the workplace, ensuring our streets are safe for women and that we have better public services for our women and their families. Harnessing the talents and skills of all women will boost our economy. A 5% increase in employment amongst women could boost the UK economy by up to £125 billion. Women's equality is at the heart of our plan for change and will drive economic growth for everyone.
Charlotte Nettles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to research, 52% of ICBs in England, including Cheshire and Merseyside ICB, still require same-sex couples to self-fund at least 6 to 12 cycles of costly intrauterine insemination before they're eligible to access IVF treatment on the NHS. So could the Secretary of State please tell us what she is doing to end the postcode lottery for lesbian and bi couples looking to start a family?
Minister. My honourable friend is right to draw the House's attention to the postcode lottery and the patchy access to IVF across our country. We want to make sure that everyone has fair access to high-quality care. DHSC have started to make progress towards their ambition to improve access to IVF services, and we also await the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence concluding its review on clinical guidance for the provision of such services.
Shadow Minister Sakibati.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parents up and down the country are anxious about the use of puberty blockers on under 18, so I was disappointed to read that the Health Secretary has failed to intervene in an NHS puberty blocker trial, despite grave concerns about children's safety. I know the landmark CAS review said more evidence was needed, but I asked the Secretary of State, will she show moral courage and common sense leadership to ensure that these dangerous and irreversible drugs are never tested on our children?
Mr. Speaker, the government's position on this has been clear. We have accepted all of the recommendations brought forward by Dr Hilary Cass. I have met with Dr Hilary Cass to discuss this, but I'm afraid to say the Shadow Minister perhaps misunderstands the recommendations that Dr Cass brought forward, given the question that he's asking today.
Peter Lamb.
Mr. Speaker, could I ask the Minister what consideration has been given to the introduction of domestic abuse safe leave for employees experiencing domestic abuse?
Minister.
We strongly encourage employers to support their employees who experience domestic abuse. Many already do this through their membership of the Employers' Initiative on Domestic Abuse, which empowers employers to take action. The Vaughan strategy, along with myself, will be working with the DBT to look at issues specific to victims in the workplace.
Bob Blackman.
Will the Minister update the House on what changes, if any, she intends to make to the Equality Act 2010? And in particular, if she is going to make caste a protected characteristic, will she ensure that people of all religions that emanate from the Indian subcontinent are consulted, because this will severely impact every single family in this country?
Mr. Speaker, we have no plans to change the Equality Act, as my honourable friend set out earlier. Through the new race engagement group being led by Baroness Lawrence, we will consider any such questions, such as the ones that he identifies.
Melody Owen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. After an appalling rape incident on the Fuller Street Bridge in my constituency, I was shocked to find that last year only 2.7% of recorded rapes in the UK resulted in a charge. What is the Minister doing to improve this charge rate and get justice for more survivors of this appalling crime?
I'm very sorry to hear of the case in my honourable friend's constituency, and it brings into sharp focus the need to tackle violence against women and girls and to ensure that our mission to halve violence against women and girls is delivered. The inheritance that we had from the Conservatives was shocking. Far too many women denied justice, cases never getting to court or victims being left to wait for years for justice. That's why the Lord Chancellor has made this a priority to take action to deliver justice for women.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, can I welcome in the gallery the Chairman of the State of the Great Hurl, the Parliament of Mongolia. Now we come to Alberto Costa. Prime Minister's questions.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night I spoke to President Zelensky to discuss progress that President Trump had made with Russia towards a ceasefire, and I took the opportunity to reaffirm our unwavering support to the people of Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, I'm deeply concerned about the resumption of Israeli military action in Gaza. The images of parents carrying their children, young children, to hospitals have emerged over the last few days are truly shocking, alongside the sheer number of people who've been killed. And we will do all that we can to ensure the resumption of the ceasefire, to get the remaining hostages out and to get aid that's desperately needed in. Mr. Speaker, the whole House will want to celebrate the extraordinary life of Group Captain John Paddy Hemingway, the last known pilot of the Battle of Britain. The courage of his generation, the fearlessness, sense of duty and service secured our freedom, and we will never forget them. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Brain tumours kill more children and those under the age of 40 than any other cancer. Mr. Speaker, from time to time, all of us get constituents in our surgeries that tell us stories which really get to us and twang on the heart. Mr. Speaker, last Friday, Laura attended my Shanford constituency. She told me of the tragic death of her 6-year-old, energetic, loving son, Talon, from a brain tumour. All that she asked, Mr. Speaker, is that I raise this matter nationally, and I'm doing that now. But I'd like to go one step further. Would the Prime Minister agree to arrange a meeting for Laura and the brain tumour support group known as Angel Mums to meet with the relevant healthcare minister to discuss brain tumour research?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank him for doing what he was asked to do, which is raising this case here. The loss of a child is simply unbearable, and I think most of us, including myself, simply wouldn't know how we would be able to react. And I think the whole House will want to send its deepest condolences to Laura and to all of Talon's family and friends. I will happily make sure that the meeting that he requests takes place, so we can reassure that we are committed to supporting life-saving and life-improving research and doing all we can to improve how we prevent, detect, manage and treat cancer. Thank you.
Andrew Pex.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like many people in Peterborough, I am passionate about tackling low pay and insecure work, especially for young people. Next month, many of my constituents will receive a welcome boost in their pay packets due to the increase in the national minimum wage. Can I thank the Prime Minister for ignoring the voices on the opposite benches who continue to oppose our plans to make work pay? And can I urge him to go further and faster in delivering our plan for change for working people?
Well, I thank him. He's a superb job for Peterborough, and we're proud that our Employment Rights Bill is tackling the cost of insecure work, and we're delivering that pay rise for 3 million of the lowest paid. We know the Leader of the Opposition opposes all that. She thinks the minimum wage is a burden and that maternity pay is excessive. It's the same old Tories. They opposed the minimum wage in the first place. They've learned absolutely nothing.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor claimed that her budget was a once-in-a-Parliament reset. So why are we having an emergency budget next week?
Mr. Speaker, we have delivered record investment into this country. We've had 3 interest rates cut in a row, and wages are going up faster than prices, which is a massive cost of living boost. That's after only 8 months, after 14 years of absolute failure. What do they do? Interest rates 11%. Massive 22 million black hole in the economy. They crashed the economy. We're rebuilding Britain.
Mr. Speaker, he knows why we're having an emergency budget, because since the last one, since the Chancellor delivered her budget in October, growth is down, borrowing is up, and she has destroyed business confidence. Does the Prime Minister now regret raising taxes on business?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the OBR will present their numbers. There will be a spring statement next week. But, Mr. Speaker, she still hasn't. We've got record investment into this country. Interest rates have been cut, and she talks about national insurance. We had to fill the 22 billion black hole that lay there. We've invested in the NHS, in schools and public services. We're pressing on with planning, with infrastructure and regulation. But I understand the Leader of the Opposition is straight talking, so perhaps she can help us with this. Is she going to reverse the next increase? If not, what's the point? If so, what other taxes is she raising to fill the hole? One way or the other.
You're in government. Speaker, the only black hole is the one that he is digging. He's shown absolutely no regret. But everybody knows the Chancellor has made a mistake. That is why they're having an emergency budget. Later today, Conservatives will vote to exempt hospices, pharmacies and care providers from her national insurance rise. Will he, at the very least, support exempting these vulnerable services from his jobs tax?
Prime Minister.
I noticed she didn't say they're going to reverse the national insurance rises. It's exactly what she wants all the benefits, but they can't say how they're going to pay them. She carps from the sideline, but can't make her mind up whether she supports or doesn't support national insurance rises. We've made provision for hospices, we've made provisions for charities, but we had to secure the economy. We had to fill the £22 billion black hole that they disgracefully left.
Mr. Speaker, he hasn't made these provisions. He keeps talking about budget benefits. Unemployment is not a benefit. Businesses closing are not benefits. I asked him whether he would exempt hospices, even children's hospices, from the jobs tax. He did not answer that question. His MPs know that this could affect end-of-life care. So I will ask the same question again. Will he exempt hospices from paying his jobs tax?
Mr. Speaker, we've already invested £100 million for adult and children's hospices, an additional £26 million in funding through the Children's Hospices grant, but we can't get away with what we were doing in that budget, the root cause, which was fixing the economy they left so badly damaged, a £22 billion black hole. Perhaps you start the next question with an apology.
Mr. Speaker, I remember when he made... They want me to answer questions, then we can swap sides. I remember when he made that announcement. He's forgotten, because the money he's referring to for hospices is for buildings. It is not for the salaries hit by the jobs tax. As St Helena Hospice in Colchester said, we cannot use this funding for salaries, which is where we need urgent help. Why is the Prime Minister not listening to hospices?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've already set out the position in relation to hospices. She says that she wants to swap sides. I mean, heaven forbid. After 14 years of breaking everything, we're getting on with the job of fixing it, and all she can do is cart from the sidelines with absolutely no policy.
Mr. Speaker, winter fuel payments have been snatched. The jobs tax is hammering everyone from business to charities. The Chancellor promised a once-in-a-Parliament budget that she would not come back for more. And in that budget, she said there will be no extension of the freeze in income tax thresholds. Ahead of the emergency budget, will he repeat? Mr. Speaker, ahead of the emergency budget, will he repeat the commitment that she made?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she's got such prescriptive questions, she can't actually adapt them to the answers that I'm giving. I mean, Mr. Speaker, I think she now calls herself a Conservative realist. Well, I'm realistic about the Conservatives. The reality is they left open borders and she was the cheerleader. They crashed the economy, mortgages went through the roof, the NHS was left on its knees and they hollowed out the armed forces. This government has already delivered 2 million extra NHS appointments, 750 breakfast clubs, record returns of people who shouldn't be here and a fully funded increase in our defence spending. That is the difference that a Labour government makes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A lady came to see me recently who needed help. She had a disability. It meant that her children have to help her cut up her food. They have to help her wash beneath the waste. They have to supervise her as she goes to the toilet. Under the Tory welfare system, we were able to get that lady on PIP. Under the Prime Minister's new proposed system, she will get zero. Nothing. And after 14 years of the Tory government, and many of us wanting to see the back of them, can the Prime Minister answer one question? What was the point if Labour are going to do this?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've lived with the impact of a disability in our family through my mother and brother all my life. I do understand the human impact of this, but the current system is morally and economically indefensible, and we're right to reform it, and nobody should be defending the broken status quo. We are proceeding on 3 principles: that if you can work, you should work. If you need help into work, the state should help you, not hinder you. And if you can never work, you must be supported and protected. They are the right principles, but we can't leave the current system as it is.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Can I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks on Ukraine and Gaza? And can I also pay tribute to Group Captain John Paddy Hemingway and all our heroes from the Battle of Britain? I know that members across this House will, like me, have heard from GPs, dentists, community pharmacists and care homes who are all deeply worried about the impact of the national insurance rise on the services they provide to patients. That's why the House of Lords passed a Liberal Democrat amendment to exempt NHS and care providers. That amendment comes before this House this afternoon, but we're hearing worrying reports that the Prime Minister will order Labour MPs to vote against it. Will the Prime Minister reassure this House and patients across the country that these reports are not true?
Prime Minister.
Can I start by pointing out that because of the changes we made at that budget, we were able to put record amounts of money into our National Health Service, and vitally important that we did so. And it isn't right to simply oppose the measures we had to take to raise the money and at the same time say, as the honourable gentleman does, that he wants the benefits of the increase in funding to the NHS. The two can't sit together. We have already invested an additional £3.7 billion of funding into social care, including £880 million to increase the social care grant. So we are taking steps. But the basic point remains, which is we can't make the investment into the NHS if we don't raise the money. And you can't simply oppose any raising of money and at the same time welcome the money into the NHS.
Sir Ed Davey.
That reply, and I hope he and the Chancellor will think about taking money from the NHS ahead of the spring statement and reverse it. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to turn to the issue of illegal hair coursing. Criminal gangs are terrorising rural communities across our country, from Cambridgeshire to Devon, from Oxfordshire to Wiltshire. Men in balaclavas are threatening and abusing farmers as these criminals tear across their fields in 4x4s. Farmers are warning that it's only a matter of time before someone is killed. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that we must act urgently against this appalling criminality? Our calls for a comprehensive rural crime strategy so we can not just stamp out hair coursing, but keep our rural communities safe from all crime.
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him for raising this important issue, and it is a matter of deep concern. We've already developing a rural crime strategy, but we'll happily work with him and others to develop it further.
Lawrence Turner.
Northfield are deeply concerned about the scourge of knife crime, and I pay tribute to the professionalism of West Midlands Police for their response to these horrendous attacks. But there are still 1,200 fewer police officers and PCSOs in the force than in 2010. A new bid has been submitted to the Home Office for 150 more officers. Will he look at this issue so that the police can do more to keep our streets secure and safe?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I join him in commending the West Midlands Police for keeping his community safe? We are doubling our investment to £200 million towards the recruitment of 13,000 neighbourhood police, giving every community a named officer to help tackle violent crime. And we're currently working through bids with forces to ensure that we do so, and I'll make sure he gets a meeting with the relevant policing minister to discuss.
Conor Denyer.
Mr. Speaker, we have a deeply unfair, unequal economic system where vast numbers of people are struggling, yet billionaires are getting richer and richer. Does the Prime Minister really think that the way to tackle this is to put the onus onto older people, children, and now sick and disabled people, rather than on the shoulders of the super rich with a wealth tax, those people who could most easily afford to pay? And if the Prime Minister uses the phrase difficult choices in his answer, please will he specify difficult choices for whom?
Well,
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we do have a proportional tax system, and we have raised tax on the wealthiest under this government. But her advice would count for a bit more if their manifesto hadn't been a recipe for £80 billion of extra borrowing. That is to do exactly what Liz Truss did to the economy, and that doesn't help any of the people that she's claiming to support.
Mohammed Yazid.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the government's ambitious growth plans for Oxford-Cambridge Arc, which promises to reverse years of decline and transform the eastern region by driving prosperity, creating jobs, and delivering much-needed housing. But does the Prime Minister agree with me that the crowning achievement of this plan would be the establishment of a world-class theme park in Bedford Borough? It would transform our local economy, create thousands of new jobs and opportunities, and elevate Bedford as a national hub for leisure and tourism.
Prime Minister.
Well, he's right to raise this important project, which we are working for. And it's vital that we do unleash the potential of the Oxford-Cambridge corridor and, of course, Bedford by generating growth, jobs and opportunities. And we're doing that by speeding up the delivery of new infrastructure projects, slashing red tape and getting Britain building.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of my constituents have approached me about the inadequate treatment of young people's eating disorders. This year, despite a 30% increase in referrals, the majority of ICBs have cut real-term funding. Currently, as I've seen in my own family and my weekly surgeries, those who reach out for treatment are told, in effect, come back when you're thinner, increasing both the human and financial costs of treatment. Does the Prime Minister agree timely intervention is critical, and will he meet with me to discuss how we fund it?
Prime Minister.
Well, he's right. Too many people with eating disorders are not getting the treatment that they need. The NHS is expanding eating disorder treatment services with a focus on accessing treatment earlier and closer to home. And we're also providing access to specialist mental health professionals in every school, and I'll make sure that he's kept updated.
Paul Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour's flagship crime and policing bill is designed to tackle the rise in antisocial behaviour, theft and shoplifting that has occurred under the Tories. It grants police the power to confiscate disruptive off-road vehicles. This measure will tackle the scourge of off-road bikes in my constituency. Does the Prime Minister agree that we are the party of law and order and that we are fulfilling our commitments?
Mr. Speaker, it's totally unacceptable for anyone to feel intimidated or unsafe due to the actions of reckless and selfish individuals. Whatever the vehicle, our bill gives police forces stronger powers to seize them immediately and put a stop to antisocial behaviour. That's our plan for change in action, making our streets and communities safer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 14 years to get ready, they came into power with no plan to reform welfare. But now, in a panic because of their economic mismanagement, they're cutting benefits for disabled people without consulting them at all. It probably says in his folder that the High Court ruled the Conservatives' consultation was too short, but at least we consulted. They're not consulting at all. So will the Prime Minister explain why he is doing things to disabled people and not with them?
No, what it says in my favour is they had 14 years, including five with a majority of... They didn't need to consult, get on with it. They had a majority of 80 for the last 5 years. They're now carping on with some of their ideas. 14 years, and they didn't implement a single one. They simply broke the system. They're in no place to lecture other people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to the charity Shelter, there are more homeless children in my city of Edinburgh than there are in the whole of Wales. That's an appalling legacy of 18 years of SNP government. Does the Prime Minister agree with me there should be no homeless children? And will he work with me, the Scottish Parliament and anyone who'll listen to end child homelessness in Scotland?
Well, the situation he describes an appalling indictment of the SNP record. The party opposite left record homelessness in England. The SNP record is equally shameful, a record number of children in temporary accommodation. Mr. Speaker, we're investing £1 billion to tackle homelessness, we're abolishing no-fault evictions and building 1.5 million new homes. Meanwhile, the SNP have cut their affordable housing budget. They've had the largest settlement since devolution. They've got the power, the money. Now it's time they started delivering.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, I received an email from Santander informing me that both the Bognor Regis and the Rustlington branches in my constituency are set to close, with 4 other bank branches shutting across the constituency in 2023 alone. The most vulnerable members of our society are being gradually cut off from essential banking services. Small cash-based businesses will also struggle to deposit their takings, faced with the added burden of travelling to Chichester or Worthing, making it even harder for them to operate. So what decisive action is the Prime Minister taking to guarantee that people and businesses in my constituency and across the country are not left without access to cash and vital banking services?
Mr. Speaker, we are rolling out 350 banking hubs across all communities, and I'll happily arrange for her to have a meeting with the Minister to discuss how that might affect her constituency.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Firstly, I welcome the Prime Minister's announcement of £200 million from the National Wealth Fund for the industrial future of Grangemouth. But today, I want to ask specifically about the workers facing redundancy. Given the assurances from the Prime Minister on the 18th of February and repeated by Anna Sarwar, the Scottish Labour leader, as recently as the 4th of March, can the Prime Minister confirm that the guarantee given on 18 months pay protection for all of those workers losing their jobs due to the Grangemouth refinery closure will be honoured, including those shared services workers, and say how the payment can be claimed by all those affected?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, Petroenius have said that every employee made redundant will get 18 months full pay. The Project Willow report that's come out today says how we can support a sustainable industrial future for Grangemouth, which is incredibly important, delivering jobs and economic growth. As he references, I've announced £200 million through the National Wealth Fund to secure the site's long-term future. And of course, that's backed by the £100 million Falkirk and Grangemouth growth deal, which is training and the training guarantee to support workers into good jobs. They're all the actions that we were taking on this very, very important issue.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, the House of Lords considers the infected blood compensation scheme regulations, which diverge from the proposals of the inquiry report and the government response. The regulations introduce new exclusions, treat victims inconsistently, and downgrade some previously agreed awards, such as that to my constituent Owen Saville. Will the Prime Minister remember the promise made to victims like Owen and think again?
Well, the victims of this scandal have suffered unspeakably, and I'm pleased that at the budget we set aside the £11.8 billion to compensate them in relation to this appalling scandal. I would gently point out that the party opposite was committed rightly to this compensation but didn't provide a single penny in the column to pay for it. The Infected Blood Compensation Authority has been established and began to make payments last year. Over £1 billion interim payments have been made, and we do remain completely committed to cooperating with the inquiry and acting on its recommendations.
Elise Midgley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everyone is talking about Adolescence, the series by Knowsley's own Stephen Graham and Christine Tamarco. It highlights online male radicalisation and violence against girls. The creators of the show are calling for screenings in Parliament and schools to spark change. So will the Prime Minister back this campaign to counter toxic misogyny early and give young men the role models they deserve?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Yes, and at home we are watching Adolescence with our children. I've got a 16-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl, and it's a very, very good documentary to watch, or drama. This violence carried out by young men, influenced by what they see online, is a real problem. It's abhorrent, and we have to tackle it. We are putting in specialist rape and sexual offences teams in every police force, doing work on the 999 calls. But this is also a matter of culture that I think it's important that across the whole House we tackle this emerging and growing problem.
Helen Maguire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal Democrats have long called for a UK-EU youth mobility scheme, and polling has repeatedly shown that the majority of Brits support this idea, including my constituents in Epsom and Ewell. A well-structured and controlled scheme would show that the government is serious about providing opportunities for young people and backing British business. So will the Prime Minister stop sitting on the fence and finally commit to a youth mobility scheme?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are working closely with our European colleagues and the EU in particular, and we are working to a reset of the relationship. We won't be returning to freedom of movement. I've made that repeatedly clear, but we're making good progress.
Lauren Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The previous government failed to properly support further and adult education over the last 14 years. And in contrast, the Prime Minister's personal commitment to technical qualifications has been encouraging. Last year's budget provided a welcome boost to some parts of the sector, but need and demand is outstripping available funding. Skills are crucial to the government meeting its missions to deliver economic growth, build 1.5 million homes, and to transition to a green economy. Can the Prime Minister provide reassurance that the funding model will be reviewed so that we won't see colleges having to turn people away who want to gain the skills that our country so desperately needs?
Prime Minister.
Well, she's right. Further education plays a critical role in giving young people the skills and confidence that they need, and of course the training we need for the future. We are investing £400 million on education for 16 to 19-year-olds this year, and our levy-funded growth and skills offer will create jobs in key industries, and I can assure her that the funding will deliver enough places for young people.
John Cooper.
Speaker, thank you.
Large spending announcements for defence would make you think that Britain is marching as to war, but the MOD is bimbling along with procurement systems better designed for peacetime. Will the Prime Minister use his good offices to bring British industry into this fight, and quickly?
Prime Minister.
Yes, but they did leave a bit of a mess that we are clearing up, having hollowed out our armed forces and having not made the necessary investment that we needed in our defence. We've announced the largest sustained increase since the Cold War of 2.5% by 2027 and 3% in the next Parliament, subject to economic circumstances. So yes, we are getting on with the job and clearing up the mess that they left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency, Stratford and Bow, has the greatest number of high-rise buildings with dangerous cladding in the country. On Friday, I visited Stratford Fire Station. Our brilliant local firefighters told me that 77 high-rise buildings in Newham and 165 high-rise buildings in Tower Hamlets are covered in hazardous materials, many of them deemed unsafe. Thousands of my constituents have been calling for justice for years. Can the Prime Minister tell me what the government is doing to ensure that private developers are held to account for the dangerous cladding on the high-rises that they have built?
Prime Minister.
Well, she's right. Remediation has been far too slow, and everybody deserves a safe and secure home. We've signed a contract with 54 major developers who will pay for or fix over 1,700 buildings, and we're accelerating that progress. We will take tough action against those who evade their responsibilities. We will recover taxpayers' funds and make sure those responsible pay up and fix unsafe buildings quickly.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I come to this chamber, Mr. Speaker, every week to ask sensible questions, and I expect sensible answers. But all I get is glazed expressions and waffle, and from the opposite benches. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Prime Minister a very simple question on behalf of all the net zero sceptics. If we became net zero tomorrow, by how much would it reduce the Earth's temperature by? Simple question.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, net zero is of course not easy, but it's a huge opportunity to boost our growth, our jobs and our economy. And so he knows my views on that. But you know, he complains that I've better ideas if they stop fawning over Putin. And I understand the member for Clacton wants to be Prime Minister. He can't even lead a party that fits in the back of a taxi.
Anna Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 1 in 5 disabled people in social housing and 1 in 3 disabled private renters live in inaccessible housing. One of my constituents with severe fibromyalgia and PTSD lives on a first-floor flat with no lift access. As we build the 1.5 million new homes that this country needs, will the Prime Minister ensure that they are built to be accessible and adaptable so disabled and older people can live independently for generations to come?
Prime Minister.
She's right. Everybody needs to be able to access a home that is suitable for them and meets their needs. The planning rules, Mr. Speaker, already mean councils must consider the needs of disabled people when planning new homes. We will go further, setting out our policies on accessible new homes very shortly, and we're boosting the Disabled Facilities Grant by £172 million, helping more people make vital improvements and live independent lives.
Lee Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite Ukraine being the victim in Russia's illegal aggression, President Zelensky has shown leadership to his people by committing to the US plans for a ceasefire. However, it's clear that Putin is playing for time and still carrying out daily attacks on Ukrainian people. So, Prime Minister, is now not the time to take those frozen Russian assets, to seize them, to give them to the Ukrainian people, to strengthen their hand at the negotiating table and to punish Russian aggression?
Minister.
Well, on both points, I spoke to President Zelensky last night following the discussions yesterday to discuss the way forward. On the wider question of the assets, look, it's complicated, but we're working with others to see what is possible, but it isn't straightforward.
Ewan Steinback.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The release of Project Willow today is a step forward in securing good jobs and an industrial future for Grangemouth. However, the Government needs to work at pace to ensure the recommendations in Willow are acted upon. Can the Prime Minister outline what steps he will be taking to ensure barriers to a rapid transition at Grangemouth are removed and investment is progressed as quickly as possible?
Well, I'm very grateful for him for raising Grangemouth again the second time in this session, and that's because it's centrally important. He'll have heard what I had to say about the projects that we're looking at to ensure the long-term future of Grangemouth, the interim measures that are being taken, and of course the £200 million of the Wealth Fund that I announced just a few weeks ago.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Prime Minister and I disagree about much. The family farm tax, the NI jobs tax, and the cut in winter fuel payments, but we surely agree that the common good is built on public order. Crossbows in the hands of killers cost lives. They cost the lives of 3 innocent women last year. Now, the previous government launched a consultation over a year ago on the regulation of crossbows, their sale and use, and we've heard nothing since. They are as powerful as guns, as silent as knives. Will the Prime Minister agree for one of his ministers to come to the House before Easter to give us a clear instruction about what the government intends to do before any more lives are lost?
Well, I thank him for raising this, and he's right to do so. It's a shocking issue, and the case he refers to is a truly shocking case. I think that's agreed across the House. We are working on this, and I'll make sure that he gets an update to ensure that he's across the detail of what we're doing.
Final question, Diane Abbott.
Most members of this House will be aware that the welfare system can be a nightmare to navigate and does indeed need reform. But could we have less of this rhetoric about his £5 billion package of disability benefit so-called reform being moral? There is nothing moral about cutting benefits for what may be up to 1 million people. This is not about morality. This is about the Treasury's wish to balance the country's books on the back of the most vulnerable and poor people in this society.
Mr Speaker, she's a passionate advocate and has been for a long time on this issue, and I pay tribute to that. But as she rightly acknowledges, the current system is broken. And this is where I disagree with her. I think 1 in 8 young people not in employment, training or education, that's 1 million young people. I think that's a moral issue, Mr Speaker, because all the evidence suggests that someone in that situation at that stage of their life is going to find it incredibly difficult ever to get out of that level of dependency. That cuts across the opportunity and aspiration that's the root of my values and Labour values about how we take working people forward. So I do see it as a moral issue. I'm not going to turn away from that. I am genuinely shocked that 1 million people, young people, are in that position, and I'm not prepared to shrug my shoulders and walk past it.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Point of order, Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The
The Shadow Minister for Women and the member for East Grinstead and Uckfield has just at the dispatch box before PMQs stated that Imam Adam Kelwick posted that he prayed for victory of Hamas over Israel, which was totally inaccurate. He made absolutely no mention in the post she referred to or of Hamas or against Israel, which had been added wrongly by the Shadow Minister. He in fact made a call for prayers of peace. The truth is, Adam has spent years working on countering extremism and even uniting people through food and conversations when rioters came to attack his local mosque in Liverpool last year. I would ask that the member correct the record and remind her that she should have made such statements outside of the House. There would have been possible legal action. What advice could Mr Speaker give to members to ensure that they do not abuse parliamentary privilege for slandering people?
Well, first of all, I'm not responsible for honourable members' questions or ministers' answers or shadow ones. I don't want to extend the question, but I can assure the Table Office will be able to advise her on how to pursue this matter, and I'm sure, without doubt, it is on the record and that people will reflect on that. Thank you. Right, let us move on. We come to the 10-minute rule motion. Alistair Carmichael.
Mr Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about the Groceries Code Adjudicator, to require coordination between the Groceries Code Adjudicator and the Agricultural Supply Chain Adjudicator, to make provision about public procurement in respect of British food products, to make provision about the labelling of food products, and for connected purposes. I also remind the House of my entry in the Register of Members' Interests. Mr Speaker, in March 1917, at the height of the First World War, then Prime Minister David Lloyd George sent a letter to an Orkney farmer, Charles Patterson. He wrote, "In the nation's interests, I urge you, at whatever personal sacrifice, to overcome all obstacles, to throw your fullest energies into the work, and to influence and encourage all who assist you, so that every possible acre shall be sown." At that time, there was no question at the heart of government about the vital importance of farmers in the Isles and across the country. In the centuries since, farmers have continued to play their part in supplying the nation's table, but their incomes have stagnated. The market for agricultural produce in the UK has not been a free market since at least the end of the Second World War. Successive governments have intervened through the payment of public subsidies to farmers, initially in the name of food security and more recently in the name of cheap food for consumers. That intervention has over the years distorted the market and allowed a range of unfair practices to be hardwired into the system. As a consequence, the market today has a handful of behemoth retailers, the supermarkets at the top, hundreds of thousands of farmers at the bottom, and a variety of processors, distributors and others in the middle. Everyone takes their cut, and then, at the end of it all, the farmers get whatever's left. The power imbalance between the supermarkets at the top and farmers at the bottom is more pronounced than any other market that I can think of, and it is well documented that those at the top who have the power wield it to their own advantage. Mr Speaker, the extensive debate that we've had in this House in recent months has laid bare the shocking truth about the lack of profitability in farming. Just last week, a new report from the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission found that real incomes for farmers have stayed stock still for the past 50 years. Shortly after the autumn budget, a group of younger farmers in my constituency came to see me and brought with them their farm accounts. They were despondent in pointing out to me that their businesses earned a net profit of 0.7% on their capital. They were not even much cheered when I pointed out that they were doing better than many of their contemporaries, as DEFRA figures say the average return is as low as 0.5%. One of those farmers was the great-grandson of Charles Patterson, a seventh-generation farmer who works the same land as his great-grandfather. You really could not ask for a better illustration of the shift in priorities of our governments over the past 100 years. Mr Speaker, this cannot go on. Farmers are seeing a rapid withdrawal of funding support. In England, the accelerated withdrawal of basic payments, followed by the closure without notice last week of the sustainable farming incentives, has left many farms desperately worried about the viability of their businesses. Elsewhere in the United Kingdom, the removal of the ring fence of money given to devolved administrations for agricultural payments leaves farmers feeling they are vulnerable to adverse change. That is why this market now needs direct and meaningful intervention. Without it, we risk losing domestic food production and any notion of food security. If, as the Prime Minister says, food security is national security, then his government should act urgently to allow our farmers to get a fair price for the food that they produce. I was in government when the Groceries Code Adjudicator was set up. I don't think that anyone believed that the GCA would be the last word in regulation of the food supply chain, but we all took the view that it was better to have something than to have nothing. 12 years on from its creation, the limitations of the adjudicator are apparent for all to see. The office has fewer than 10 staff, all seconded from other public bodies, and it is funded by a levy on supermarkets. And expect an operation of that size to take on some of the largest retail businesses in the country is laughable. It's hardly surprising, then, that businesses supplying supermarkets are reluctant to make complaint, especially when the office itself has not issued a single fine in the entirety of its existence. Such cases as are pursued end up with settlements and non-disclosure agreements. Since publicising my bill, I have spoken to a number of producers who have told me about their experience at the hands of supermarkets. Just yesterday, I spoke to a businessman who had been a supplier of Brussels sprouts to a large supermarket. His company had, on the basis of undertakings made to it by the retailer, invested significantly in their business, borrowing £400,000 to build a state-of-the-art packing facility. In the year 2022 to 23, this one supermarket accounted for 47% of their business. Then, in February 2023, they were told by the supermarket that their supply was no longer wanted for that season. For that business, the news was a hammer blow, and despite it being a prima facie breach of the Groceries Code, Supply Code of Practice, the GCA initially declined to intervene. Now, I would love to say that this was an isolated incident, but the GCA annual survey conducted by YouGov suggests that it is not. 42% of suppliers would not raise issues because they believed that the retailer would find out and there would be consequences. The experiences that they describe include delisting without reasonable notice, undisputed invoices not being paid according to agreed terms, retrospective changes to supply agreements, running a promotional activity at the supplier's expense, not the retailer's, and much more. Practice among supermarkets shows a wide variety of behaviours. 7 of the retailers were judged to have improved or at least stayed the same, with Sainsbury's coming out on top with a net improvement score of 10.34%. Unfortunately, 7 others, including Home Bargains, Asda, Tesco, Ocado, Iceland, Morrisons and Amazon, were scored as having worsened by varying degrees, with Amazon's performance being judged to have worsened by a whopping 21.38%. Amazon was also scored as having complied with the code consistently or mostly only 46.96% of the time. Mr. Speaker, yesterday's Daily Telegraph reported that Asda was threatening a price war in order to regain market share that they had lost in recent years. For farmers, that is a chilling prospect. If supermarkets are about to embark on a race to the bottom, then we can be pretty sure that it will be farmers, not company executives or shareholders, who will be expected to take the hit. Mr. Speaker, it is not for us in Parliament to pick a winner in a fight between supermarkets, but they should know that we are watching. And any supermarket that thinks it can rebuild its balance sheet on the back of Britain's farmers might find themselves in front of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, they had better have some good answers when they get here. My bill has support from MPs across the political parties. It's sponsored by members from the Liberal Democrats, Labour, Conservative, Plaid Cymru, SNP, Green and Democratic Unionist Party. It also has wide geographical support. It has sponsors from Shetland to Cornwall and across the 4 nations that make up the United Kingdom. I am grateful for the support I've received from the farming unions, the Country Land and Business Association, Scottish Land and Estates, the Senate Farmers Association and the Countryside Alliance. This is a quite remarkable coalition of people who all understand that if we fail to act now, then before too long there may be no industry left to protect. Charles Patterson's family in Orkney is still working the same land to this day. And if we want to keep farming communities alive for generations to come, however, we need to act now to make it happen. That is why, Mr Speaker, this bill is necessary and why I seek the leave of the House today to introduce it.
The right honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. The question is that the right honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare to bring in the bill?
Mr Speaker, Jane Kirkham, Sarah Bull, Jenny Riddle-Carpenter, Charlie Dewhurst, Sarah Dyke, Anne Davis, Seamus Logan, Ellie Chowns, Jim Shannon, obviously, David Chadwick, Tim Farron and myself.
No punch without Judy. Alistair Carmichael.
Food Products, Market Regulation and Public Procurement Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday 20th of June, Mr Speaker.
Friday the 20th of June. When's the committee sitting? Right, let us move to the programme motion to be moved formally. Question is, as on the order paper, as many of the opinions say aye. Contrary, no, the ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
National Insurance Contributions, Secondary Class 1 Contributions Bill. Consideration of Lord's amendments.
Now.
No. Before we move to the consideration of the Lord's amendments, I can confirm that Lord's amendments 1 to 20 engage Commons financial privilege. Having careful consideration of Lord's Amendment 20, I am satisfied that it would impose a charge on the public revenue which is not authorised by a money resolution passed by this House on the 3rd of December 2024. In accordance with paragraph 3 of Standing Order number 78, the amendment will therefore be deemed to be disagreed to and is not available for debate. We will begin with Government motion to disagree with Lord's Amendments 1, with which we will consider the other Government motions to disagree with the Lord's Amendments listed on the selection paper. I call the Minister to move the motion to disagree with Lord's Amendment 1. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to consider the Lord's amendments to the National Insurance Contributions Secondary Class Contributions Bill. I'd like to start, Mr Speaker, by thanking members of both Houses for their careful scrutiny and consideration of this bill. I'd like to place on record my particular thanks to the Financial Secretary, Lord Livermore, for his invaluable support and for leading the bill so expertly through the other place. Now, during this bill's consideration in the other place, 21 amendments were made, 20 of which we will seek to address here today. But before I address these amendments directly, Mr Speaker, let me remind both Houses of the context for this bill. When we entered government, we inherited a fiscal situation that was completely unsustainable. We have had to take difficult but necessary decisions to repair the public finances and rebuild our public services. The measures in this bill represent some of the toughest decisions that we have had to take as a result. In order to restore fiscal responsibility and get public services back on their feet, we needed to raise revenue, including through the measures that this bill will introduce. And many of the amendments from the other place put at risk the funding that this bill seeks to raise. So let me be clear. To support these amendments is also to support higher borrowing, lower spending, or other tax rises. And it is with that in mind that I will now turn to the first group of amendments. I'll give way.
The Minister giving way. He does talk about one of the mission he's made is talking about growth, which is what the government's raison d'etre is. Last week we found out that the economy actually shrank. Has he done any work to find out how much that point percentage drop has caused in terms of cost to the government? Because that's going to have a huge impact when we're discussing tax implications.
Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've set out to the honourable gentleman in a number of debates in recent weeks, the reason why we as a government had to take difficult but necessary decisions was to restore fiscal responsibility after the completely unsustainable situation that we inherited from the party opposite. And that fiscal responsibility, that economic stability, is essential for greater investment in the economy, which is the bedrock for growth, the growth that we are so determined to pursue. I'll give way.
The Minister for giving way. I wonder if you could outline how many billions the government will spend this year, what percentage 22 billion would be of that, and an additional question, if I can be so greedy, Mr. Speaker, is how much the flatlining of the economy has cost the government compared to that 22 billion, because I'll put it to the Minister that the impact of this NIC rise has been much greater than this mythical 22 billion alleged by the government.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not clear from the honourable gentleman's intervention whether he finally accepts the £22 billion black hole that we inherited when we took government, because I know several of his colleagues have sought to rewrite history, but the facts are there, that we inherited a completely unsustainable fiscal situation with pressures, a £22 billion black hole that we had to take difficult but necessary decisions to remedy. And it's important to do that because without the basic fiscal responsibility that a government should deliver, without that economic stability, the investment, which is the basis for growth, will not happen. I'll give way.
Honourable Minister for giving way. He spoke about facts. Is he aware of the fact that when the Labour Party won the election, the economy was growing? And is he aware of the fact that now the economy is falling?
Mr. Speaker, I am very aware of the fact that we inherited an economy and a fiscal situation in a mess that was completely unsustainable and that it was our duty as a government to address. No responsible government could have let things carry on as they were. With the fiscal situation in the way it was when we inherited, no responsible government could have let that carry on. And that is why we had to take the action we did. I'm not going to give away. I'm going to make some progress. I've given away several times already. But that is why we had to take those decisions, Mr. Speaker, to put the fiscal responsibility back at the heart of government, to return economic stability to the public finances, and to have that basis for the investment on which we can grow the economy and put more money in people's pockets. Now, Mr. Speaker, I will turn to the first set of Lord's amendments, which I will discuss together, namely 1, 4, 5, 9 and 13, as they relate to the NHS and social care providers. Mr. Speaker, these amendments seek to maintain the employer national insurance contribution rates and thresholds at their current level for NHS commissioned services, including GPs, dentists, social care providers and pharmacists, as well as those providing hospice care. As honourable members in both houses will know, as a result of the measures in this bill and wider budget measures, the NHS will receive an extra £22.6 billion over 2 years, helping to deliver an extra 40,000 elective appointments every week. Primary care providers, that is general practice, dentistry, pharmacy and eye care, are important independent contractors who provide nearly £20 billion worth of NHS services, and every year the government consults with general practice and pharmacy sectors. I'll give way.
Minister, thank you very much for your answers to the questions that everyone has asked. One of the questions that comes out of my constituency on a regular basis is the one about the GP surgeries. The national insurance contributions will hit them immensely. They've told me they have a choice. The choice is to reduce staff and cut back on appointments. Ever mindful that the Minister has said 22 billion extra for NHS, but if the impact upon the GP surgeries and the health clinics by reducing staff, reducing their capability of being able to produce and deliver a health service. Is this not really, Minister, a step down on what is offered on the ground in my constituency and indeed in all the constituencies? So would the Minister reconsider that in relation to the GP surgeries and the impact upon them in particular?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising the question of GPs and the funding and the support the government is providing to them, because the government is investing an additional £889 million in general practice, which brings the total spend on the GP contract to £13.2 billion in 25-26. Madam Deputy Speaker, This is the biggest increase in over a decade, and the changes to the contract will improve services for patients and help make progress towards the government's health mission, shifting from analogue to digital, sickness to prevention, and from hospital to community care, as set out in the Prime Minister's plan for change. So that support for GPs is an essential part of what the budget, including the measures which we're debating in relation to national insurance, delivers. I'll give way.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. In my constituency of Horsham, Age UK have told me that the employer's NICS rise will cost them £50,000 a year. Would the Minister agree that it is impossible to improve the public sector by taxing the public sector?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we inherited public services that needed urgent support. We inherited public services that were on their knees, and part of the reason why we took those difficult but necessary decisions at the budget last October was, of course, to restore fiscal responsibility, but also to get public services back on their feet. And this is not just about public services and the services that people across the UK enjoy. It's also about making sure that we have that stability for economic growth. Because if you haven't got a health service that works well, you haven't got a healthy population who can go to work. If you haven't got a transport system that works well, people can't get to work. And so that investment in public services, getting them back on their feet after 14 years of the party opposite being in control, is not only essential for what people in the UK experience, but also to make sure we can have that economic growth which will put more money in people's pockets. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to make a little progress. I've spoken about GPs, Madam Deputy Speaker, but of course, alongside GPs, the Department for Health and Social Care has also entered into consultation with the Community Pharmacy England regarding the 24-25 and 25-26 Community Pharmacy contractual framework. The final funding settlement will be announced in the usual way following this.
The National Pharmacy Association announced for the first time ever in 104 years that they are planning action by reducing services because of the implications of the budget. But one of their requests is the release of an independent report commissioned by NHS England on the future funding of pharmacies. Now that the government is in charge of NHS England, would he speak to his health colleagues to release that report so that before the consultations all finish, so that actually the public and the pharmacies can see exactly what the financial situation of that independent report will be?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and obviously reports which are in relation to work the Department for Health is carrying out is a subject for ministers in that department to answer. But in terms of the funding that I'm speaking to today, as I said, the final funding settlement will be announced in the usual way following the consultation which is underway. Moving on, Madam Deputy Speaker, to dentistry. On dentistry, the NHS in England invests around £3 billion every year. NHS pharmaceutical, ophthalmic and dental allocations for integrated care systems for 25-26 have been published alongside NHS planning guidance. In relation to social care, the government has provided a cash increase in core local government spending power of 6.8% in 25-26, including £880 million of new grant funding provided to social care, funding which can be used to address the range of pressures facing the adult social care sector.
Giving way. The figures that he is presenting, along with the answer that he gave to my honourable friend, the member for Strangford, similar to the Prime Minister, is money going into sectors that actually is not going to mitigate the national insurance rise. So will he actually confirm that sectors like hospices, social care, GPs, pharmacists will actually have some support and not tell us about money that's not going to help them with regard to this jobs tax that's coming in?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the various organisations or services that I'm talking about, whether that's GPs or pharmacies or organisations providing social care, obviously receive money from government. And the way in which those discussions take place is to consider pressures on the providers of those services in the round. And that's the way that the negotiations take place. Now, in terms of direct support for employer national insurance contributions, that obviously applies to central government, local government and public corporations, which is much the same way the previous government approached it under the health and social care levy. In terms of the social care or GPs, as I've been outlining, pressures which they face are considered in the round in terms of their funding settlements. And as I said, in terms of social care, the £880 million of new grant funding is funding which can be used to address the range of pressures facing adult social care. I'll give way.
It sort of makes an interesting point, but if we look at children's hospices are going to be down by £4.9 million. Most of the funding for children's hospices doesn't come from the government, it comes from communities, it comes from people supporting them. Can the Minister at the dispatch box assure those children's hospices, such as Acorns, which is in the West Midlands, that they will not be down by that money that they're going to be losing through extra NI contributions, and that £4.9 million is going to be replaced by the government for children's hospices?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for raising the issue of hospices, and if I may set out the government's position in terms of hospices as they were referred to in some of the amendments we're considering today. In terms of hospices, the government recognises the vital role that they play in supporting people at the end of life and their families, and also recognises the range of cost pressures that the hospice sector has been facing over a number of years. We're supporting the hospice sector with a £100 million increase for adult and children's hospices to ensure they have the best physical environment for care, and £26 million of revenue to support children's and young people's hospices. Now, the £100 million will go towards helping hospices to improve their buildings, equipment and accommodation to ensure that patients continue to receive the best possible care. I'll give way.
To the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way, but I think the point that we are really trying to emphasise from this side of the House is that the government appears to be giving with one hand but taking away with the other. And the hospice sector is just one example of many sectors that are being adversely affected by the cruel tax that the government is placing on them.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said a few moments ago, the way in which the government supports central government, local government and public corporations, that is departments and other public sector employers, is the same way in which the previous government responded to the health and social care levy, and that is a standard way in which the government offers support in terms of employer national insurance costs. But if I'm speaking, I'm going to make some progress. I'm going to make some progress because I'm going to make some progress, Madam Deputy Speaker, because the government wants to shift healthcare out of hospitals and into the community to ensure patients and their families receive personalised care in the most appropriate setting. I'll give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and can I thank him for doing that. The Southern Area Hospice is located just outside my constituency. They have to raise £3.6 million per year, £300,000 per month. They are not government funded, as has been alluded. What reassurances can he give to those folks in the Southern Area Hospice who are currently using their services for end-of-life care that this government will do the right thing and will support our hospices by not including them in this national insurance contributions increase?
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for her intervention. I've explained how the government is approaching employer national insurance contributions and the support that the government offers for central government, for local government and for public corporations. And this is an established way of responding to employer national insurance contribution changes, which the previous government did in terms of national insurance. I feel the Honourable Gentleman has been so persistent, he must have an amazing point to make, so I will give way to him. I wait with bated breath.
It's an amazing point, and I hope that the Honourable Gentleman will get it. Because at Prime Minister's question time, it was quite clear that the Prime Minister didn't get it. So let's now tell the real truth. The money that is being given by the government, taxpayers' money, to hospices, children's hospices, like Shooting Star, like Demelza House, is for buildings. The national insurance increase is hitting directly the people that do the work upon which very sick children depend. Why is that imposition being made?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the £100 million which the Honourable Member alluded to is important funding to help hospices improve their buildings, their equipment, the accommodation to ensure that patients can receive the best care possible. As I also mentioned a few moments ago, Madam Deputy Speaker, there will be £26 million of revenue to support children and young people's hospices. And more widely, of course, with hospices being charities, the hospices provide support for charities, including hospices, through the wider tax regime, which is amongst the most generous in the world. And this includes tax relief to charities and their donors worth just over £6 billion for the tax year to April 2024. And finally, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, all charities, as the Right Honourable Gentleman will know, including hospices set up as charities, can benefit from the employment allowance, which this bill more than doubles from £5,000 to £10,500, and this will benefit charities of all sizes, and particularly the smallest. I'll give way.
But the Minister knows that this is funding for 1 year, mainly for buildings, as he has admitted. This is going to be a cost on hospices every single year going forward. So it will be something that's cumulative. It means that they have to ask their communities for more and more and more just to give that basic help. So is he going to commit to fund children's hospices by £4.9 million that they're taking off them every single year, or not? Yes or no?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the points that I was making just before I gave way to the Right Honourable Gentleman are recurrent features of the tax system. The support through the tax regime for charities and their donors, worth over £6 billion in April 2024, is a recurrent system, a feature of the system which happens in every year. The increase in the employment allowance from £5,000 to £10,500, which will benefit hospices set up as charities, is a permanent change. That is one that we're making through this bill to increase the employment allowance. I'm going to make a bit of progress, so I've given way quite. Sorry, is he intervening? Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, yeah.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think, as is evident to many members of this House, the Minister for the first time has found himself not able to answer some very straightforward questions from honourable members on this side of the House, which is the difference between the allocation of funding which is for capital and the allocation of money which is for current expenditures, and the impact that difference will have on our hospices, on our children's hospices, on our GPs and others affected by Labour's jobs tax. I'm sure members in the House of Lords who brought this amendment back will also have noticed the fact the Minister hasn't been able to answer these questions. So prior to this going back to the House of Lords, will the Minister agree, Madam Deputy Speaker, to speak to the Chancellor or the Chief Secretary to get a clear answer to the questions that have been raised today about which money will be available for capital and which money will be available to offset the National Insurance charge increase?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sorry to hear the Right Honourable Gentleman, promoting you there. I'm sorry to hear the Honourable Gentleman felt that I was being unclear. I think I was being perfectly clear in the position. He may not agree with the position, as he's entitled to not do so in this chamber, but I think I was being very clear in that the way in which support works in direct response to the employer national insurance contribution changes is the government provides support directly to central government, local government and public corporations, so it's departments and other public sector employers, as was the case under his government when in relation to discussion around the health and social care levy. That does not apply to GPs, to dentists, to hospices and other organisations who we've been discussing today. The important point I was making, which I hope was clear to him and his colleagues on the other side of the House, is about the wider support which the government is providing to hospices, to the funding we're providing to GPs, the discussions we're having with other primary care providers. And that's the context in which this bill has to be seen, because the reason why we're able to take decisions around funding for public services is because of those difficult decisions that we took at the budget last year. And this bill implements one of those decisions. And it was noticeable, Madam Deputy Speaker, at Prime Minister's questions earlier today, that I think when the Prime Minister asked the Leader of the Opposition, whether she would reverse the national insurance rise that we are bringing in through this bill, she refused to commit to that. So I'm unclear exactly how. I'm unclear exactly what the opposition's position is, and I can hear one of the honourable gentlemen saying that he will update me in his speech later. I think, or I may have misheard him there, but I think I heard him say he will confirm later whether the opposition will reverse the national insurance change we're making or not. I look forward to that update.
Minister, to explain to the House how it is right, as it is, for the government to cover the extra national insurance in the public sector, for example, in hospital provision, but it is not right to do it at end-of-life care in a hospice. How can that circle be squared? That you cover the national insurance for those who are being treated, the hospitals which are treating people, but you won't cover it for the hospices which are seeing end-of-life care?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, in answer to the honourable gentleman's question, the fundamental principle here is about what organisations the government will support in response to the changes to national insurance contributions. And the approach the government is taking, which is in line with the previous government, the approach that they took in the health and social care levy, is that the government provides support for departments and other public sector employers for additional employer national insurance contributions. And as I said to the honourable gentleman, that means central government, public corporations and local government. Primary care providers are independent contractors and will therefore not be exempt from these changes. I'll give way one more time.
Thank you very much. The Minister makes the point that this is secondary for primary care providers. However, what he doesn't acknowledge is that those primary care providers, as I hear from dentists and community pharmacies and social care providers in my constituency of Bicester and Woodstock, still don't know how they will be compensated by the government. We are very close to the start of the tax year. These are small businesses which are providing critical primary care services into our communities. How can they operate when the Minister obfuscates and says other people might talk to them at a later stage about the money that they might receive? Would it not be easier for the Minister to accept the Liberal Democrat amendment from the House of Lords and clear up this matter today?
Well, for clarity, Madam Deputy Speaker, the response in regards of other primary care providers who are independent contractors is not for direct support in the way the government provides it for departments and other public sector employers. Those pressures which they will face are considered in the round alongside all of the other pressures which they face, and that's taken into consideration in the funding which is provided to them. So it's a different way of that solution being arrived at than the honourable gentleman suggested in his question. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, looking across the debate that we're having today, as I set out earlier, the revenue raised by the decisions in this bill will help to fund public services, including the NHS and other social care providers. And the proposals in these amendments would put much of that funding at risk. And so to support these amendments is also to support higher borrowing, lower spending, or other tax rises on that point.
Gentleman for giving way. What advice then would you be able to give to Thames Hospice and Alexander Devine Children's Hospice in Maidenhead, who are looking at a £300,000 and a £50,000 increase in bills respectively? Is he saying that they should be cutting services, or is he expecting our residents in our constituencies to raise more money for these hospices to give it directly back to the Chancellor?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and I clearly don't know the situation of that particular hospice, so I'm not going to give them direct advice about how to manage their operations. But more generally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've set out the government's approach to providing direct support for departments and other public sector employers. And of course, it depends in terms of how hospice care is provided, because in many cases, integrated care boards are responsible for the commissioning of palliative and end-of-life care services to meet the needs of local populations. And so where hospices are commissioned by the NHS for their work, then contractual arrangements should be discussed with the integrated care board at a local level. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll give way one more time.